Hello, my friends. I hope you're doing well today. So in the previous videos, we talked about the parts of chemical formulas and the types of chemical formulas. Now we're going to focus on how to properly write chemical formulas, specifically molecular and ionic formulas, and how to name those corresponding compounds. So what I have on the screen here, I know is maybe looks pretty busy, looks pretty daunting, but I like this flow chart. It's very similar to the flow chart that if you took intro chem here at Rose, it's similar to that flow chart, but it has more examples. But what I like about this flow chart is that it helps the student organize his or her thoughts as to what rules are needed when naming a particular compound. If it's ionic, a metal and a nonmetal, or if it's molecular, a nonmetal and a nonmetal. And in this and in subsequent videos, I'm going to reference this flow chart because we're going to talk about these rules. And I'll give you, there's a copy of this on the lecture Canvas page. I will give you a copy of this in lecture as well. No, you cannot use it on exams, but you can use it in your studies and when doing homework and practice problems. But let's start our conversation on compounds, specifically how to write them and name them. Let's start with what I think is the easier one, which is molecular or covalent compounds, specifically ones that are binary. Binary molecular or covalent compounds are those molecules that contain two nonmetals. So when naming that molecular binary compound, you use the name of the element along with Greek prefixes, the mono, dis, and tris, and I've listed those, the most common Greek prefixes here. So and there are a few caveats to that. Once looking at a compound and realizing that it's molecular and realizing that it's binary, it just contains two nonmetals, you name the first element by its name. For the second element, you use the stem of that element's name. You drop the INE and add "ide." That's the same as the ion name of the other element. And you use Greek prefixes to designate how many of that particular atom are present. There are two important caveats to these rules. Let me get my little pointer here so I can highlight them for you. The two caveats are, first, that if you have one of the first element, you do not use mono. So for example, SCl2, it is not monosulfur dichloride, it's just sulfur dichloride. If you have one of the, you do use mono. So for example, CO, that is a binary molecular compound. The name of that compound would be just carbon, but you do use mono for the second to be carbon monoxide. Now there are a few exceptions where you do not use mono in the second. It's listed here. I am not going to be as concerned about that exception. NO can be nitric oxide or nitrogen monoxide. I'm not going to be so concerned about this. The two exceptions I want you to know with regards to naming molecular compounds is the fact that A, if you have one of the first element, you don't use mono. Also, you don't use Greek prefixes if H is one of the elements. So for example, if I was to give you the molecule HCl, you would look at that species and you would say, oh, well, hydrogen and chlorine, that is a molecular covalent compound. They're both nonmetals. It's binary. I just have two types of elements. So I name this by just saying hydrogen chloride. If I had H2S, that would not be dihydrogen sulfide, but just hydrogen sulfide. So, Greek prefixes, they're not used if you have H as one of the elements. Now, maybe you're saying, but wait a minute, Mrs. Lepola, I thought we talked about, I remember learning in other chem classes and an intro that these are acids. Why aren't we naming these as acids? We're going to talk about acids in a subsequent video. Acids are designated by the state AQ. When I wrote these two chemical formulas, I didn't put AQ by them. If I just have HCl or H2S, those are molecular covalent binary compounds, and they use the molecular binary compound rules. So that's molecular binary compounds. I want to mention real briefly about organic compounds, because organic compounds, they are molecular compounds. They only involve nonmetals, but specifically they involve carbons and hydrogens. Now, if you go on in chemistry and take, particularly if you take organic chemistry, you will talk for many, many lectures on how to name organic compounds. It has its own rules, its own system of nomenclature. The only take-home message I want you to really have from this slide is that organic compounds that end in -ane are called hydrocarbons, meaning they just contain carbon and hydrogen. And the prefix designates the number of carbons that are present. That's really all I want you to know. Hopefully that whets your appetite to learn more about organic chemistry. If so, then you can take the 2000 level organic chemistry course. So that's the end of this little video. In our next vignette, we're going to talk in more detail about how to name ionic substances, those that have a metal and a nonmetal.